Hello, I'm John Coleman, and I'm going to be talking on this film about three key topics to do with young people. I'm going to talk about puberty, about brains and brain development, and about sleep. Just to say a little bit about me, I'm a psychologist, and all my life, really, I've been working with and committed to supporting young people and their families. I'm particularly interested in parents, parenting and parenting support, but really for me, young people have been the center of my work, and it's really nice to be talking on this film about these important topics. So, puberty, what is it? Puberty is that stage at the end of childhood when the body changes and really the young person begins to become a mature adult. Most of us know about puberty as sexual development, but one of the important things about it is that it's much more than that. It involves changes in all parts of the body, most of them, of course, invisible to us. There are many different ways in which young people respond to puberty. Some hardly notice it and they go through it with the greatest ease. But for others, it can be worrying, can be troubling. And there are all sorts of aspects of it that may worry young people. I mean, one important thing is that the age at which it happens varies hugely. So young people can start puberty at 10, but they may not start till 13. So big variation. And some people very much struggle with comparing themselves with others, worrying about whether they're on time or out of step with everyone else. And the changes to the body do affect how people feel about themselves. So you may be proud of the changes, you may be proud of the fact that you're becoming mature, but you also may worry. You may worry that you're not the same as other people and so on. One very important aspect of this is that there's a small group who are either very early or very late developers. So very early would be 9, and very late, maybe 14 or 15. And we need to be aware of those young people because they do need extra support. As far as the late developers are concerned, the research shows that they may struggle with their schoolwork, they may struggle with their social relationships. As far as the early developers are concerned, these young people may be vulnerable, particularly girls, I think. For boys, they're strong and taller than everyone else, and so they might do better. But girls may feel as if they're unusual and they may need extra support. Puberty is an important thing for parents to know about, and so that information should make it possible for parents to reassure young people when they're not sure if what's happening to them is normal. But I think the more parents know about puberty and understand the differences that individuals experience, the better and the more opportunity there is for parents to be supportive. Okay, I'm going to move on now to talk about the brain. And one of the really fascinating things is that until about 20 years ago, we didn't know very much about the teenage brain at all. In fact, it was believed that the brain stopped developing at the end of childhood. However, as a result of the technology of scanning, we're now able to see what's happening in the brain. And what we've learned is that the brain changes hugely during the teenage years. In fact, the changes that occur during the teenage years are probably the biggest changes that happen to the brain during the whole of the life course, apart from during infancy. So it's a really, really important period in terms of brain development. So what are the main changes that happen at this time? Well, first of all, the brain matures. It matures in all areas, and that leads to better thinking, more scientific reasoning, better language, better memory, all those very positive things. But it also is a time when the brain reorganizes itself. We call this pruning. And what happens, and I know this is difficult for people to get their heads around, is that in fact there is some part of the brain that actually shrinks, that reduces in size during the teenage years. And it's called pruning because there are essentially too many neurons, nerve cells, too many connections, and the brain allows the unwanted connections to die away during this period. That ends up as a very positive process because it makes the brain more efficient, but the process itself is the reorganization can be quite a challenge for some young people, and it may feel as if it causes confusion and uncertainty and so on. The other very important thing that happens is that the hormones undergo big changes too. Now, we all know about hormones in the sense of the sex hormones, and everyone knows that because of puberty, sex hormones like testosterone and estrogen are released to a much greater extent. That's what contributes to puberty. But the additional thing that happens during the teenage years is that there are many, many hormones in the brain that really affect our behavior. In fact, there are dozens of hormones. And a number of them are particularly important as far as teenagers are concerned. One of them is dopamine. This is the hormone that we call it the reward hormone. This really encourages young people to look for sensation, excitement, and also to have good experiences. And just to give you an example, the hormone dopamine goes up and down to quite a considerable extent. In the adult brain, the hormones do vary over the course of a day or night, but not to any great extent. What happens in the teenage brain is that variation is greater. And that underlies the mood swings, the ups and downs, and the difficulty of managing emotions. So that combined, that variation in hormones, combined with the reorganization, the restructuring as a result of pruning, these things can at times make teenagers feel that they've got a lot to cope with. One of the things that's important is how long do these changes take place and when do they take place? As far as we know, for most, these changes begin around puberty and they continue. And one of the things that people may know is that there's been a lot of talk of the fact that the brain continues to develop till the mid-20s. But really the major changes are occurring in the teenage years up to about 18. However, the part of the brain at the front, which is called the prefrontal cortex, that's the area to do with thinking and reasoning, and that does go on maturing and developing until the mid-20s. So it's a long period of change, and it's important, I think, to recognize that it's a critical period. What happens during this time is very important. Good environments, good support can really help young people. And so we can do something about encouraging healthy brain development. If you like, the brain and the environment interact with each other. And so the environment makes a difference. And that means that parents and carers, adults, professional adults, they all have a role here in helping the young person to make sure that what's happening in the brain, that development that's occurring, is happening in the most productive and useful way. I want to talk a little bit more about hormones now. I've mentioned dopamine, which is the reward hormone, and we know that there are more dopamine receptors in the teenage brain, so there's actually more dopamine in the brain. Now, dopamine, as I said, does encourage people to look for good experiences. Sometimes we talk about teenagers experimenting, even risk-taking. Some people talk about novelty seeking. That is that the dopamine encourages young people to look for new experiences. And that's actually a very positive thing. That's something that, allows young people to grow, to mature, to learn new things, and to, of course, move towards adulthood. Other hormones that are important that I think I should mention, first of all, the stress hormone, cortisol. Now, there's more cortisol in the teenage brain too, and so experiences that might be stressful or difficult create this sense of anxiety and stress. And young people do say that this is a time of considerable stress for them, particularly around school experiences, pressure from teachers, exams, tests, and so on. So cortisol is important. And there are, as I say, many other hormones, but another one that I want to mention, and I'm going to talk a bit more about it later, is melatonin. That's the hormone that makes us sleepy. And what we've discovered is that that acts in a slightly different way in teenagers than it does in adults. But as I say, I'll come to that in a minute when I talk about sleep. I think one thing really that's important here is just to think about the impact that these hormones and the hormonal variation has. First of all, of course, it has the potential to lead to mood changes, mood swings, and so on. But also, it reflects the fact that reward is very important for teenagers. So teenagers, because of the dopamine, are more sensitive to reward. And very often, young people experience this time of a time when adults are criticizing them. They're nagging. They're not giving them the perhaps the support that they need. And I think knowing that reward is so important is really, it is very useful for both parents and professional adults. If we want to motivate young people, then focus on the rewards, because young people will respond to those. Of course, they need to be age appropriate. The older the individual, the more important the personal relationships are, the support, the recognition, the opportunity for taking more responsibility. But it's important to remember that our reward plays a big part in determining the behavior of young people. I think that one other thing that I want to mention here is that for adults to know about the changes in the brain can be very reassuring, because adults are faced with often quite puzzling behavior, contradictory behavior, paradoxical behavior that doesn't make sense. Why don't teenagers think before they act? Why are they so angry or full of conflict? Or why are they pushing us away? And I think understanding the process of brain development during this period can be really, really helpful for parents, because it just explains what's going on. It enables you to see that this isn't just random behavior, or it isn't just aimed at you, making things particularly difficult for you. It's the process that young people are going through, and it ends up in something very positive, which is a much more mature individual. But the actual stage can be challenging. And I think for parents, and indeed for young people too, in my own work, helping young people understand this, I've seen young people just say, well, that's so reassuring. I didn't know that. I didn't understand why I was behaving like this or why I felt like this. And so I think learning for everyone, learning more about these changes can really help. And now in the last section of this film, I'm going to go on and talk about sleep. Now, I've already mentioned melatonin. And so it's important to know that for you and I, for adults, melatonin is released at 10:30 or 11 at night. And that is the signal, really, that we become sleepy, and it's a signal that it's time to go to bed. Now, what we've learned is that the body clock in the teenager doesn't work in quite the same way. So melatonin, in most, not everyone, but in most teenagers, is released later at night, sometimes up to an hour and a half later. That means that it's more difficult for young people to get to sleep. And that's a very important fact, because teenagers need their sleep. So first of all, it's important to understand that if teenagers aren't going to sleep, it's not just because they're being difficult. It is actually a physical attribute of this particular age group. Now, I say that teenagers need their sleep. If you put a teenager in a sleep laboratory, they'll sleep for 9.5 to 10 hours. But of course, if you're getting to sleep later at night because of melatonin, and if you're having to get up early to go to school, your sleep, the time that you've got for sleep, is being constricted, is being limited. And we know that teenagers who really have a lot of sleep loss are having perhaps less than 6 hours a night. This can affect both learning and mood and behavior. So getting enough sleep is really important. We've also learned that important things happen during sleep. Sleep is quite varied. You have waves of different things happening. You'll all know about dreams. But we also have learned that there are times at night when what we call memory consolidation happens. That is, that the learning and memory that's happened during the day is actually consolidated at night, which is another reason why sleep is so important, especially if you're at school and you're learning new stuff all the time. So the real focus, I think, should be on helping young people get into better sleep routines. Now, there are things that you can do in the home to help teenagers with this, but it's really about routines. So, having a period before you go to sleep where you relax, so turn the lights down, mood music or whatever it is, maybe have a hot drink without caffeine. But parents can really make a difference here. And of course, the most important thing is to turn off digital devices, because keeping those on is very disruptive as far as sleep is concerned. Now, I know that's really hard, but when you can really help teenagers do that, they do find that it does make a huge difference. So I always say to adults, to parents and carers, do persevere, because this is really important. Now, it's also important that the school has a role to play here. And there are a number of trials going on where schools introduce sleep lessons so that young people understand more about sleep. They understand why sleep is important, but they also understand how they might overcome the melatonin effect. We also know that engaging parents is important too. So the biggest effect is if schools can engage parents and make sure that parents understand things about sleep too. So I'm coming to the end. In this film, I've talked about puberty, I've talked about the changes in the brain, and I've ended up talking about sleep. All these things are, in a way, we've learnt more in the last few years because of scanning and because of the research, which has really helped us understand that this is a stage, this is a process that young people go through in the transition, if you like, to adulthood. And it can have its ups and downs, and all of you watching this film will know that there are times when things aren't so easy for young people. But the important thing for adults is to stick with young people, to recognize that this is a stage, to support them, to be as informed as possible about what's happening, and to remember that the role of the adult during these years is absolutely crucial. Parents and carers are just as important during the teenage years as they are during childhood. They're just important in a different way. So I hope you found this interesting and useful, and I wish you all the best in your home or in your work with young people. Thank you very much.